Thank you. Yes, we as a family are very sad because after 3 weeks of being here with you in America, we're returning home to Ireland tomorrow. Actually, I had something of a bone to pick with Jeremiah about the Irish representation inside. I suppose we're here to do that in person. But we have greatly enjoyed the generosity and hospitality of many of you. We have been staying with the Cradavilles. We've enjoyed the generosity of cars and swimming pools, especially in this weather. For Irish people like us, we most definitely needed that. So we're very, very grateful, but we're sad because our time is drawing to an end and we're having to return home tomorrow to some perhaps more decent temperatures and to everyone who speaks as strange as I do. In a very simple way, actually, the thought of our time coming to an end parallels what's happening in our passage in Matthew 25 this morning. For similarly, Jesus knows too that his time is also drawing to an end. It's near the end of Matthew's gospel. He's teaching on the Tuesday before the Friday on which he's killed. And so Jesus knows himself that his time is short. And what he does in Matthew 25 is give us a very good example of what a true Christian really looks like. If you're visiting with us this morning, we normally print our passage, the Bible section that we're looking at in our bulletin. You can find that on page 3. There are notes, if it's helpful for you, on page 7, where I break that down as to what it truly looks like to be a real disciple into 3 simple points. You may like to keep your eyes on that as we go through this morning. But if I was to summarize it for you, I would simply put it to you like this. The true Christian will eventually be seen to be wise, for they will be ready for the return of Jesus. What I want to do over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so is simply unpack that for us. The true Christian will eventually be seen to be wise, eventually, for they will be ready for the return of Jesus. That's, I think, what Jesus is really driving us to consider in Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 to 13. So keep an eye, please do keep an eye at least on that. The first thing that we need to see is that according to Jesus, the end is absolutely certain. And when I use that word, those words, the end, I'm meaning the ultimate, the final conclusion of all things, the end of time, the conclusion of history. This is what Jesus is speaking about to his disciples in this story of the 10 virgins, the 10 bridesmaids, that the end is absolutely certain and that it is the end of all things for all people. So we could not get more dramatic. That's what we're thinking about this morning. And just by the way, as we begin considering this first point, this one matter will not allow you to classify Jesus, as many people do, as simply a good moral teacher. What Jesus is teaching here disqualifies him from being just like any other religious leader. Because he is saying that there is a day when all things will be brought to an end, and it depends totally upon him. How so? Well, very often Jesus compared himself to a bridegroom. You can read other accounts of his life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you can find that he very often described himself as a bridegroom. And so when he tells this story here, there is a bit of self-reference going on. And a bit of cultural background might help you understand the point that Jesus is making. Because it is a story where we have a boy who has met a girl, and the boy and girl fall in love. The boy has gone to the father of said girl and asked for her hand in marriage, and the father has agreed. Now, there's a slight difference happens at this point in Jesus's culture compared with our own. At this point in Jesus's culture, it was all down to the man. He was the one who was responsible then at that stage for organizing absolutely everything. The only thing that the bride-to-be had to worry about was getting herself and her bridesmaids ready. Wouldn't that be lovely, ladies? Wouldn't that be such a turn in our culture? And so what we find is that the bridegroom, he goes away to get things ready. But this is the point. This is the point that you must hold on to at this stage. An engagement in Jesus's culture was so much stronger than any sort of engagement in our culture. It was so strong that it was almost as if the couple were married already before the wedding. So, for example, if for example, the couple decided in the turn of events that they didn't want to follow through into the wedding, the culture of their day would have classified them as having been divorced already, even though they hadn't even been married, even though they hadn't even gone through with the ceremony and gone to the wedding. Or say, for example, if the husband had died, then the bride-to-be was considered to be a widow. Betrothal, engagement was so much stronger in Jesus's day compared to our own. And what Jesus wants us to know is that the wedding, the end day, is as certain, so much stronger, is as certain as that. The day, the final day, is equaled to the wedding feast, the marriage, and it's as certain as that. It's so much stronger. So these bridesmaids should have known that since boy had met girl, boy and girl had fallen in love, father of the bride had agreed to give his daughter in marriage to the husband, that this day was absolutely certain. Certain. It was as if it had already been decided. And in Jesus' teaching, this is what he wants us to know. It has. There is a day that will be decisive. There is an end to all things that is absolutely certain. And he wants, as Jesus tells this story, he wants all people everywhere to be ready for it. It's as sure as the engagement in Jesus' day. And this isn't just an isolated example in the Bible. As I said, Jesus often referred to himself as the bridegroom and the church as the bride. This day is certainly happening in Jesus's mind. This day is certainly on. And indeed, if we were to step outside the stories of Jesus's life, you may know the Bible begins with a wedding and it ends with a wedding. It is central to the teaching of God's word that there is a day to look forward to. There's a day when Jesus himself will return as the bridegroom for his church. Still, you may be thinking, come on, seriously, are you asking me to believe this? Are you asking me to swallow this morning, that we're being forced to think about the end of all things? But just look back over the last couple of years. Who would ever have thought that the world would have been so fragile? That we, you, all of us, most of us, are forced to continue to meet outside. Who would ever have thought of that? This world is not as dependable as we would perhaps have thought it to have been. And so this idea that Jesus might bring all things to an end is maybe not just as out of reach as it used to be. Plus, also, please consider that this is Jesus' teaching. And Jesus was not known for telling lies and deceiving people. Most people, even those from different religions, recognize Jesus as being a loving and kind person. Loving and being kind is based on telling the truth. What you do with a story like this depends largely on who you think Jesus is. And according to Jesus, there is a day There is an end. As certain as that wedding in our story, that is absolutely certain. That's setting things up for us. The second thing we see, then moving on, is that on that day, there will be some who are found ready and waiting, and others who will be found wanting and unprepared. You know, our story actually is quite a simple story, although there are a few little particulars that I need to draw your attention to. But in Jesus' day, it would have been easily understood. These bridesmaids should have been prepared. And until we reach verse 5, it appears that most of them, in fact, all of them, actually are. Do you see that? So we're told that the announcement has been made, the wedding is on, and the bridesmaids themselves have, as far as we can tell until verse 5, done all that's needed. All the preparation is ready. The bridegroom has taken slightly longer than expected in making his preparations. You see that the bridegroom was delayed, but eventually the cry goes out. He's here. He's back. He's made everything ready. We're told that it caught all of the bridesmaids sleeping, however. Do you see that? That's an important thing to remember. Do you see that in verse 5, as the bridegroom was delayed, they all, do you see verse 5? They all became drowsy. And that's really important to hold on to. All of them became drowsy. Because it's only in verse 6 that we're told that things begin to unravel for some of them. Then the difference becomes more obvious. There were 5 wise bridesmaids and 5 foolish bridesmaids. And what made the difference was simply that the 5 wise bridesmaids had taken more oil for their lamps. That may be a little bit confusing to you as to why bridesmaids would be running around with lamps with oil in them. But really, it's not that strange at all, certainly in Jesus's culture, because it was very unclear, very uncertain as to when the bridegroom would arrive. And if you particularly wanted to draw attention to yourself as a bridegroom, well then a little light show didn't hurt. So if you wanted to make a grand entrance, having those bridesmaids walking in your bridal party with their lamps would have certainly caused a bit of a stir, perhaps more so than if you had arrived in the middle of the day. So it wasn't unusual for the bridesmaids to have lamps with oil in them. The 5 wise are prepared. The 5 foolish are not. And notice this with me also. All of them, whether they're wise or foolish, when the bridegroom does come, all of them want to go into the party. You see that? So the 5 foolish bridesmaids look at the 5 wise bridesmaids and say, give us some of your oil. We want to be part of the procession. We want to be there when the party begins. The 5 wise say, look, if we do that, there won't be enough for either of us. None of us actually will be able to make it to the end. And so the 5 foolish run off to get oil for their lamps. But on their return, something devastating happens to them. You see, they come back, they go, they buy their oil, and they come back, and they bang on the door of the marriage feast. And they say in verse 11, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered, you see, verse 12, truly, I say to you, I do not know you. And they never get in. I used to think that these stories of Jesus, the parables, were little children's stories. You pulled these out for a Sunday school lesson when you couldn't think of anything else really to do, because they're simply little stories, aren't they? But the truth that Jesus is teaching here is devastating. Those are utterly devastating words to hear. Truly, truly, the bridegroom says, I do not know you. Now, what is this teaching us? Well, I think it's teaching us a number of things. The end that Jesus says is absolutely certain will not be the same for everybody. It won't. There are 5 wise and 5 foolish. The 5 wise go in, and the 5 foolish are shut out. We have an expression in Ireland that regardless of what's going on in your life, you could be facing the most dire set of circumstances. There's an expression that you will often hear being bandied about amongst Irish people, and it goes simply like this: sure, it'll be grand. It'll be grand. Regardless of the circumstances that you're facing, regardless of the likeliness of the outcome being to your disadvantage, most Irish people slap you on the back and say, sure, it'll be grand. Can I tell you something? It will not be grand in the end. For everyone. The end will not be the same for everyone. There are 5 wise and 5 foolish. Again, this is Jesus, regarded by almost everyone. In fact, probably, actually, all people as being a loving, kind, good moral example. And yet he's forcing this issue on us all. There is an end that is absolutely certain, and it will not be the same for everyone. It will not be grand for all people. But notice also, it's only when the bridegroom comes back. It's only then is it clear who's ready and who's not. Look at verse 5. We're told that all of the bridesmaids became drowsy. There's nothing negative in that. The delay went on and on. They all became drowsy. And it was only at the end when it becomes apparent who was ready and who's not. Meaning, you and I can't tell. I cannot tell you by looking out this morning to you who is ready and who's not. I don't know. More to the point, it's not up to me to decide. Again, it's what you think about Jesus that matters, and it's what he thinks about you that will really count. What are churches famous for? Churches are famous for having a judgmental, critical spirit. This parable won't allow it. It's only at the end. It's only when the cry goes out. It's only when the bridegroom comes back that any of us will actually be seen to be ready or to be wanting. So how dare we judge others? The question is, are you ready? Because, look, everybody does want to go in, don't they? All the bridesmaids want to go in the end. The foolish arrive banging on the door, wanting to get in. So we cannot tell. And what Jesus is really worried about here is not those who evidently reject him. What Jesus is really worried about here are those who simply go about neglecting him. So let me end. The end is certain, according to Jesus, and it will not be the same for everyone. So according to Jesus, you need to decide now if you're going to be wise or foolish then. Then it will be too late. You need to decide now. Decide what? Well, you need to decide if Jesus is telling the truth or not. It's that simple. You need to decide if he is the one who will wrap absolutely everything up in the end. And then you need to get your relationship right with him. The Christian will eventually be seen to be wise. Eventually. For they will be ready for Jesus' return. That's what he's teaching here. So are you Are you here this morning wise? Have you made the wise move? Are you wise? Or will you be seen to be foolish? Wisdom in Matthew's gospel is a massive subject. He wants you to be wise. I imagine most of us don't want to appear as fools. He wants you to be wise. That's one of the reasons why he wrote his gospel. Do you know that Matthew contains over half the references to wisdom in the entire New Testament? He wants you to be wise. And this whole discussion on wisdom actually begins, well, it runs throughout Matthew's gospel, but in this context, it begins back in chapter 24, where Jesus draws attention to the fact that Noah was a wise man in his day. And I think that's so helpful when it comes to practicing wisdom now, so that we're ready then. Because many of you will probably know the story of Noah building his ark in the middle of a desert with no lake or clouds in the sky, and everybody going about living their life as though nothing was going to happen. Jesus often draws attention to this. How foolish do you think Noah felt? Right? There he is with his hammer and nail, building this great big boat with no sign of any water near or far. How foolish do you think he felt? Noah probably felt incredibly foolish until the first drop of rain. Then, and only then, was Noah seen to have been wise. And I think what Jesus is teaching us here and encouraging us to be in terms of being wise is to say, well, look, you may actually appear foolish in the eyes of the world today to live with Jesus at the center of your life. You may appear foolish to prioritize what he thinks is right and to criticize what he thinks is wrong. You may appear foolish. You may even feel foolish yourself. I don't imagine Noah got up every morning thinking, oh, I'm a wise man building. I'm pretty certain he probably felt pretty foolish on occasion. But what Jesus wants us to know is that that day is certain, and the wise person gets ready for it now, regardless of how you feel, regardless of how you appear. Because when that day eventually does come, no one will want to be found to be foolish. What is it that the foolish bridesmaids couldn't do for themselves? They couldn't get themselves in. They couldn't save themselves. And there was no one else they could rely upon to open that door. Get ready now. Do not delay, Jesus is saying. Let us learn wisdom and not be found to be foolish. Because Jesus does say, watch, stay alert, be ready, keep waiting. Keep waiting for that day, of all days, keep waiting for that day. For you do not know neither the day nor the hour. So will you? Will you be wise today so that you're not found to be foolish then? Let's pray.